This utterly crumbling ruin behind me is the Chhatar Manzil. This was the palace of Ghaziuddin Haider, where he entertained Bishop Heber. As usual, Bishop Heber is withering in his criticism of the architecture. The steps inside he likens to bathroom steps. Bishop Heber joined Ghaziuddin Haider for breakfast here in this palace. He came in a procession along with the resident, who was in the state palanquin. Bishop Heber was carried in a tonjon, likely a lot less comfortable. Of course, he found the palace puny. Adjoining Chhatar Manzil is Farhad Baksh. The resemblance to La Martiniere is striking. This was also designed and built by Claude Martin. By good fortune, I find a man who actually lets me into the ruined castle and takes me on a walk around. As I walk through this symbol of Awadhi royalty, I think about how meddlesome the British were in the affairs of native kingdoms. No issue was too small for them to poke their exalted white noses into, and no opportunity to get cash into their grubby white hands was ever wasted. Here in Lucknow, Bishop details how the British orchestrated the removal of Hakim Mehdi, the very well respected minister of Awadh, and replaced him with Aga Mir, the Nawab's former Khansama. Under Aga Mir's guidance and with British connivance, Nawab Ghaziuddin Haider made several disastrous decisions, including giving a loan of £1 million to the Marquess of Hastings for the Nepal War. Eventually, the Nawab was unable to maintain even a small rump of an army and became completely dependent on British forces to collect revenues so as to pay the British for protection. This mismanagement frustrated the British, who had the unique need to be liked and feared at the same time. The Nawab rightly pointed out to the British that they were responsible for his troubles. Ghaziuddin Haider received Bishop Heber at the summit of the staircase, embracing the resident and then the bishop. He then offered an arm to each of them and led them into a long and handsome gallery. In all likelihood, this is the hall where the bishop had breakfast with Ghaziuddin Haider. This painting by Sitaram shows us what the breakfast must have been like. There was a large party present, including many of the Nawab's family and court. There were many Indian and English dishes, including a pulao which the bishop tried and found delicious, being devoid of ghee or garlic. After breakfast, this wannabe king walked into a drawing room where he showed Bishop Heber his crown, a velvet cap surrounded by pointed rays of diamonds and a white heron's plume in front. At the end, he gave Bishop Heber a copy of his own works. This wannabe king had set up his own press in Lucknow and had published a work called Haft Kulzum, a dictionary and grammar of the Persian language in 2 volumes. Amazingly, in a city full of astonishing heritage, not too far from Chhatar Manzil is the palace of Aga Mir, the despised prime minister of Awadh at the time of Bishop Heber's visit. This is now the residence of the district magistrate of Lucknow, a very powerful bureaucrat and completely closed to visitors. Claude Martin was a Frenchman who came to India as a lowly soldier. He defected to the British, rose in the ranks to become a general, and built a vast fortune, mainly because of his uncanny ability to spot opportunities, invest wisely, and his reputation for financial probity. He was a true polymath. An expert metallurgist, he managed the Nawab's mint. An expert engineer and architect, he designed and built many of the buildings associated with the Nawabi era. He was the first to introduce flying balloons in India. But his most remarkable legacy is this beautiful building, which now serves as a school in Lucknow. Criticized by many, including the bishop, thought by some to resemble a wedding cake, I find his house, his tomb, to be the prettiest building in all of Lucknow, with its beautiful grounds full of flowers and butterflies. It is said that he built his tomb inside the building because while all properties could be acquired by a greeting Nawab, a tomb was inviolate. No Nawab would want to live in a tomb. In a move that was extremely unusual for that era, he willed that his estate become a school after his death. But after multiple lawsuits, many related to which Christian sect got to administer his school, the school was finally started in 1840. Similar schools at Kolkata and Lyon were also endowed by Claude Martin. His true genius lay in the design of Constantia. It was built like an impenetrable fortress. During 1857, La Martiniere was stoutly defended by school, students, and teachers, and although abandoned by the British for a while and looted by rebels, Martin's tomb itself vandalized and prized open. It was taken back to the British and restored. In 1932, this became the only school in the world to have been awarded battle honors. Forgotten today, Claude Martin may also have been the man who invented lithotripsy. He treated his own bladder stone by putting a sound into his urinary bladder and filing away a large and painful stone until it was gone. There are many paintings of Colonel Claude Martin, but none more evocative than this dynamic painting, teeming with figures showing the cockfight involving birds belonging to Asaf-ud-Dawla, the Nawab Mazir of Awadh, and Colonel John Mordaunt, an employee of the East India Company. That is Colonel Martin in a red jacket. Also in this painting is Johann Zoffany himself. This painting is a complex document of early Anglo-Indian life, embodying the cosmopolitanism, the multiculturalism, as well as the cultural diversity in a complex social world. One forgotten detail: this painting was commissioned by none other than General Warren Hastings, the Governor General of India. Today, the campus has been beautifully restored with a small museum which hardly anyone visits, judging by the register. This museum is full of little paintings and mementos of Claude Martin's life, as well as the life of this extraordinary institution. This painting of a young Indian woman holding a fishing rod is that of Boulogne. 30 years younger than Claude Martin, she was his mistress, and he had technically adopted her. This pastel green Taj Mahal of Lucknow is the grave of Boulogne Lise. She was a daughter of grandson of Aurangzeb's Wazir, so descended from Mughal nobility, but appears to have been a victim of child abuse. She came into Claude Martin's household when she was 9 years old, and she quickly became his favorite mistress. Claude speaks very tenderly of her, that he treated her like a daughter. Another structure on the grounds is the grave of William Hodson. He was a great British hero of 1857, founder of Hodson's Horse. He gave up his life valiantly fighting in the final assault on Lucknow in 1858. He is just resting here a while. Praised fulsomely by Prime Minister of England and others after his death, he was dogged throughout his career by accusations of financial impropriety, mistreatment of natives, and many consider him a common looter. What I remember most about this brave gentleman is that he was the cold-blooded murderer of the sons of Bahadur Shah Zafar. He did that without remorse and was praised fulsomely for it. This entire complex with the Imambara and the Rumi Darwaza remains visually arresting. But the one little gem that Bishop Heber completely missed was the Baudi, one of the very few Baudis that exist east of Delhi. These are a constant feature of the landscape in Rajasthan and Gujarat. This Baudi is perhaps a little clue that these buildings were made primarily as a relief measure for a famine and drought that existed at the time. This complex is also where Asaf-ud-Dawla is buried. Lucknow was very much a Shia state, and out here I can see many markers of the Shia loyalty, including a picture of Ayatollah Khomeini. Escorted by over 50 troops, with 22 camels and 3 elephants accompanying, Bishop Heber made rapid progress between Lucknow and Shahjahanpur, taking only 10 days. Somewhere along the way, he got influenza and got very sick. Application of leeches to his forehead effected a relatively quick cure. Periodic epidemics of influenza took a major toll of life in India up until the 1920s. The landscape along the way is green and agrarian and home to some obscure small towns. But at one point, these towns were of some importance. Bilgram was the British cantonment site in Awadh before Kanpur took the honor. In Shahjahanpur, Bishop Heber was back in East India Company territory. Shahjahanpur was squarely in Rohilkand, populated by Rohillas, descendants of Afghans that had migrated over the past centuries. Bishop Heber saw a large population of young men with nothing to do. The Rohilla and Mughal armies long been disbanded. The British squarely blamed Warren Hastings and his misadventure for this Rohilla tragedy, but of course that did not stop them from taking Rohilkand for themselves from the Nawab and patting themselves on the back for the order and prosperity that British rule brought to the Rohillas. I find it surprising that to some extent Bishop Heber seems to sympathize with the resentments felt by the Rohillas by their loss of independence and sheer scale of unemployment. These resentments would explode dramatically in 1857. On 31st May 1857, rebels attacked this church. Mordaunt Ricketts, the son and namesake of the resident at Lucknow that the bishop had stayed with, was killed. Women and children took shelter in the turret and were later evacuated. The events in Shahjahanpur in 1857 inspired a book by Ruskin Bond, The Flight of Pigeons, which was later made into a movie by Sham Benegal called Junoon. No matter how much I try, I cannot enter the church. There's supposedly a large number of dogs in there, and the gate was locked. Right next door to the church, I see a scene that would not be out of place in rural England. A group of young men dressed in tidy whites playing cricket on the village green. It makes me wonder, between India and England, do we really know who won? Within sight of this church, with its history of a massacre, and surrounded by a garden with all the roses in bloom, is a museum extolling freedom fighters for India. Pride of place in this museum belongs to Ashfaqullah Khan, a Rohilla who was from this area, a local hometown hero. There are many displays in this museum that highlight critical moments in the fight for Indian independence, including the Kakuri train robbery. There is also this map which shows the extent of fighting in the rebellion of 1857, showing clearly how limited in geographical scope the rebellion actually was, which is probably why it was doomed to failure. Among the displays that highlight important personalities, there is the one inevitable display that highlights Chandrasekhar Azad. A short drive from Shahjahanpur is the small town of Tilhar. Bishop Heber arrived here on November 11th, 1824.
And not to the selfie generation. I see these I heart signs all over India. The cutest one is probably in Tilhar. In this small dargah, by the side of a wheat chalk lake, Bishop Heber had his name recited in the prayers for the payment of 1 rupee on November 11th, 1824.
Bishop Heber's next major stop was Bareilly, where he arrived on November 14th, 1824. On the way, he passed by Fatehganj, which was a city founded by Nawab Shujauddaulah to commemorate his battle against Hafiz Rahmat Khan in 1774. Hafiz Rahmat Khan was the last great Rohilla chieftain, and Bishop Heber speaks very highly of him. Under him, the country was cultivated and prosperous, and this brave old man fought till his last breath in battle against the British, who had colluded with Nawab. Perhaps to atone for this treachery, the mausoleum of Hafiz Rahmat Khan became a spot of pilgrimage for the British, painted by the usual suspects after his death. Bareilly itself is a city that I dislike intensely right away. It is extremely crowded and very loud. If a jhumka fell over here, nobody would notice. The only thing that I find of interest is the multitude of monkeys that are crossing the streets upon high wires. This high wire act required because the streets are probably deadly for monkeys.
Bareilly was a small, ruinous town when Bishop Heber visited, but his host, Jacob van Rennen, told him about 100,000 or more men with nothing to do. And these men exploded on 31st May 1857 when the revolt reached here in Bareilly. 54 British were killed. Most of the women and children were evacuated to Nainital.
That evening of 31st May 1857, the grandson of Hafiz Rahmat Khan, Khan Bahadur, formed his government here and declared himself the viceroy of the Mughal emperor. Against all odds, Khan Bahadur ruled for a year, but eventually, after losing the Battle of Bareilly, made it to Nepal. He was brought back and hanged here in front of the Kotwali. What about Jacob van Rennen, Bishop Heber's host in Bareilly? He was an Afrikaner. If you were white, the entire British Empire was your playground, and the East India Company had officers who were French, like Lord Martin, and South African, like Jacob van Rennen. But of course, if you were brown or even mixed race, you could not be an officer in the East India Company army. Today, the people of Bareilly seem to have linked their identity to the jhumka, a type of earring, because of its connection with the Bollywood song. Jhumkas are not even made here. The Rohilla connection is now completely forgotten.
This is where Bishop Heber crossed the Ganga. The river was deep, and he saw elephants needing to swim across. The river has now moved many kilometers away, and a high bank and this ancient temple are the only reminders that the river used to be right here.
Garh Mukteshwar shows all the signs of being an abandoned old pilgrimage town. The kind hosts take me around the temple. There is some evidence that this was a holy site, even going back to when Shang visited India. Next door, there is a smaller temple which is opened so I can take a look. With its graceful arches, it is clearly falling on hard times. But the wonderful hosts have taken great care to keep this place sacred and well preserved.
Bishop Heber relates the story of a hermit who lived not far from here, and a tiger would come and visit the hermit every night. These hermit and tiger affection stories are common to many cultures. Tigers were very common here. The story goes that one day Aurangzeb killed 6 tigers in a single hunt. They are long gone. The British treated tigers like vermin and offered a princely sum of 4 rupees for anyone who killed one tiger. Around here, Bishop Heber saw ice being made, with water being left overnight in shallow pans in earthen beds. This was a very expensive and labor intensive process. By the 1830s, American entrepreneurs had figured out ways to transport large amounts of ice from the Great Lakes.
The ice was then transported in large ships and stored in ice houses in major urban areas. Of course, refrigeration ended all that. With its immense religious significance, this area has seen religious gatherings and melas from time immemorial. In November 1946, in one such mela, major rioting started by stone pelting of some Muslim shopkeepers. In the next several days, more than 300 were killed. There is vast difference between the accounts of Hindus and Muslims about what actually happened, but what I find most interesting is that the British had simply given up any pretense of governing by this time, which is why they were in a hurry to leave. They were just in the way. Today, the violence is completely forgotten. There is no memorial. Indians always seem very reluctant to memorialize their dead. But in one sense, the legacy of hatred is still alive. In modern India, politicians are still trying to exclude Muslim merchants from plying their trade around Hindu pilgrimage sites. Meerut is crowded, loud, and a very difficult city to like. But as always, when you come to the cantonment or the White Town, the streets are ordered, it's a lot quieter and much cleaner.
Meerut was an important cantonment town. Bishop Heber stayed here for 10 days and consecrated this church on December 19th, 1824. He celebrated Christmas of 1824 here when the choir sang many of his hymns.
The church is clean and gleaming, and all the fans are on, and it's nice and cool inside. Turns out they were anticipating an important official when I showed up. It is generally accepted that the revolt of 1857 started in Meerut. In retrospect, there were plenty of warning signs that the sepoys were disaffected, but it came as a major surprise to the British. The soldiers were aggravated here in Meerut after 85 sepoys were sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for refusing to use the new rifle cartridges greased with the fat of cows and pigs. Probably from a sheer ostrich response, the commanding General Hewitt did not place a European guard on the jail, nor did he place a guard on the sepoy lines. Goaded by courtesans, the sepoys attacked their officers and the prison and freed their brethren.
This church was witness to a pivotal moment in the revolt of 1857 when sepoys attacked this church on 10th May. To me, that was the point of no return. From then on, the conflagration could only spread. The sepoys then made an incredible decision. They decided to march to Delhi and declare Bahadur Shah Zafar as their emperor. That changed what could have been a small local mutiny into a national conflagration, a war of independence.
In Meerut, Bishop Heber met a soldier of Begum Samru and they cordially exchanged gifts. Her husband, Walter Reinhardt Sombre, was the man responsible for the Patna massacre in 1764. Walter ran into Farzana, a courtesan, in the alleys of Chowri Bazaar in Delhi. Absolutely smitten, he married her, and this woman, all of 4 feet 6 inches, accompanied him on all his campaigns and became a very capable soldier herself, making a name for her bravery. This painting shows the household of Begum Samru with the eclectic mixture of East and West, Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, which for a short period of time showed that harmony and coexistence was possible. But before we get misty eyed about Begum, we must recall that she was also renowned for her cruelty. Offended by one of her dancing girls, the Begum had her locked up in a vault, and so nobody might take pity on her and rescue her, she put her own bed on top of the door and slept there until the poor girl's screams and moans died in a few days. Begum Samru was extremely wealthy in her lifetime, and being childless, passed her fortune to Samru's great grandson by his first wife, only known as Badi Begum. His name? David Ochterlony Dice Sombre, named in honor of David Ochterlony. He went on to be the first Indian member of the British Parliament in 1841, although his tenure was short-lived and he was fired for bribery. David died young in unfortunate circumstances, and the entire fortune eventually was usurped by the British. Bishop Heber was escorted in style by Skinner's horse from Meerut to Delhi. This legendary cavalry regiment, which still exists and whose honor Independent India issued a stamp in 1978, was established by James Skinner, born to a Scottish father and Indian mother in 1803. He started his career in the Maratha army because the East India Company army would not accept mixed-race people as officers. He eventually made it into the East India Company army anyway, and is considered one of the fathers of Indian cavalry. This man was perhaps the most dashing adventurer of his time, very comfortable in British and Indian culture. James Skinner was one of the original white Mughals. But here in Meerut rests perhaps the most important white Mughal of all, David Ochterlony. In this incredibly overgrown graveyard, I follow this man who takes me to the grave of General Sahib, as he calls Ochterlony. Deeply involved in all the affairs of Rajputana, David Ochterlony, this man from Massachusetts, had just fixed a crisis in Jaipur when another one loomed in Bharatpur. Baldev Singh, the Raja of Bharatpur, had just died, but before his death, he had wisely entrusted Ochterlony with making sure that his 5-year-old son, Balwant Singh, be crowned the next king. In the meantime, Durjan Sal, the cousin of the young Raja, had usurped the throne. Ochterlony was on his way to Bharatpur to make the succession stick. However, Lord Amherst was not willing to recognize the son of Baldev Singh as the Raja and countermanded Ochterlony. This deeply hurt the pride of David Ochterlony, who believed in honor and felt that his word has been broken. Ochterlony died heartbroken in Meerut on his way to confront Amherst with his disappointment. His death was a huge loss to the East India Company, which built a huge memorial in Kolkata, now known as the Shahid Minar, but it was also a huge loss to India and Indian people, who lost a man who was most sympathetic to their culture and to their cause.